The heat in San Bernardino County was not merely a weather condition. It was a hostile physical force that seemed determined to crush anything that dared to move under the mid-afternoon sun. It was 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, and the asphalt of the expansive, cracked parking lot radiated a shimmering haze that distorted the air like a mirage. Sarah sat inside her aging silver Honda Civic, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles had turned the color of old parchment. The air conditioning had surrendered 10 miles back on the I-15, leaving her exposed to the stifling, dusty breath of the Mojave Desert. Sweat trickled down her temple, matting a stray lock of blonde hair against her skin, but she didn't wipe it away. She couldn't move. Her eyes were locked on the building in front of her, a structure that looked more like a bunker than a place of business. It was a fortress of solitude and aggression disguised as a roadside bar. The building was a squat, windowless block of concrete painted a matte black that seemed to absorb the brutal sunlight rather than reflect it. There was no welcoming sign, no neon open light, no happy hour banner fluttering in the hot wind. Just a heavy steel door reinforced with iron bars and a row of motorcycles parked with military precision. They were massive machines, Harleys mostly, their chrome pipes glinting violently in the sun, high handlebars reaching up like skeletal arms praying to a merciless god. To anyone else driving by, this was a place to avoid, a blight on the arid landscape to speed past on the way to the glitter of Las Vegas. To Sarah, it was the X on a treasure map she never wanted to find, the end of a road she had been walking blindly for years. It had been 3 years, 2 months, and 4 days since Mark had packed his brown leather suitcase for a regional sales conference in Phoenix. He had stood in their hallway, checked his watch, kissed her on the forehead, a distracted, routine kiss that tasted of coffee and toothpaste, and walked out the door. He never came back. The police reports were a stack of papers in her glove box, dog-eared and tear-stained, all ending in the same inconclusive bureaucratic shrug. Voluntary disappearance. They told her men leave. They told her he probably had a mistress, or a gambling debt, or just a midlife desire to restart. But Sarah had found the receipt yesterday, tucked inside the ripped lining of his old winter coat, while she was finally, painfully, packing his things away for donation. A credit card receipt from this specific bar, dated just 2 days before he vanished into thin air. It was the only breadcrumb she had found in over 1,000 days of deafening silence. Sarah took a deep, trembling breath, inhaling the smell of stale fast food wrappers in her back seat and the hot, chemical scent of the dashboard vinyl. She opened the car door, and the heat hit her like a physical blow. The silence of the desert was instantly broken by the distant, rhythmic hum of the highway and the loud crunch of gravel under her sensible flats. She felt ridiculous in her floral sundress, a ghost of suburbia haunting a graveyard of chrome, oil, and leather. She walked toward the steel door, her legs feeling heavy as if she were wading through deep water. Every step was a battle against the primal instinct to run, to go back to the safety of not knowing. But the not knowing was a cancer. It was eating her alive, cell by cell. She reached out, her hand trembling, and pulled the heavy metal handle. The door groaned, a sound of rusted protest, as she stepped from the blinding white brilliance of the California sun into a cavern of red-tinged darkness. The transition from the blinding desert sun to the interior of the clubhouse was jarring, leaving Sarah temporarily blind. As her vision slowly adjusted to the gloom, she realized the air inside was thick, almost solid. It was a suffocating cocktail of stale beer, old leather, unwashed denim, and a cloud of cigarette smoke that hung low over the pool tables like a storm front. The sound of AC/DC thumping from a jukebox in the corner cut out abruptly, as if someone had severed the power cord with a knife. Conversations died in throats. Glass halted halfway to mouths. The scratching of a pool cue being chalked stopped mid-stroke. Sarah stood in the doorway, blinking, and realized with a cold spike of terror that every single person in the room was looking at her, and none of them looked happy about it. The silence stretched out, agonizing and heavy, vibrating with a specific kind of territorial hostility. This wasn't a public bar where you ordered a Chardonnay and complained about your boss. This was a sanctuary for the initiated, a church for the lawless, and Sarah was a glaring anomaly. Her eyes finally adjusted enough to make out the details of the men staring at her. They were older, weathered like the desert rocks outside, beards that reached chests, arms covered in sleeves of faded greenish ink, faces etched with the deep lines of wind, sun, and hard living. They wore leather vests, cuts, adorned with patches that Sarah didn't understand but instinctively feared. The Death's Head winged skull logo stared back at her from a dozen chests. The atmosphere wasn't just unwelcoming, it was dangerous, charged with potential violence. "You lost, sweetheart?" The voice came from the bar, slicing through the quiet. A man with a shaved head and a spiderweb tattoo climbing up his neck was wiping a glass with a grey, oily rag. He didn't smile. His eyes were flat and hard, like the eyes of a shark smelling blood in the water. He didn't stop wiping the glass, his rhythm steady, dismissive. Sarah took a step forward, the wooden floorboards creaking loudly in the quiet room, sounding like gunshots to her ears. She clutched her purse to her chest as a shield, a pathetic defense against the men in this room. I'm not lost," she stammered, hating how weak her voice sounded, how it quavered in the smoky air. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time, forcing steel into her spine. "I'm looking for my husband." A low ripple of laughter moved through the room, dry and cynical. A large man at a nearby pool table, holding a cue stick like a mace, turned his back to her, dismissing her existence entirely. The disrespect was palpable. To them, she was less than a nuisance. She was invisible. "Wrong place," the bartender said, turning away to stack bottles on a shelf. "Husbands don't come here, only brothers. Try the strip club down on Route 15, they get a lot of wandering husbands there." "No," Sarah said, the desperation giving her a sudden, jagged courage. She walked all the way to the bar, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird trying to break its cage. She fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking uncontrollably, and pulled out the photograph. It was wrinkled from hours of being held, damp with her sweat. "His name is Mark Reynolds. He was here 3 years ago, I have a receipt. He disappeared right after. He didn't go to a strip club. He was here." She slammed the photo onto the scarred wood of the bar counter. It was a picture of Mark at a neighborhood barbecue, wearing a blue polo shirt, holding a spatula, smiling his safe, gentle smile, the epitome of the American suburban dream. The bartender glanced at it for a fraction of a second, his expression unchanging, bored even. "Never seen him," he lied. The lie was so casual, so effortless that it infuriated her. It was a practiced lie, smooth as oil. "And we don't keep a guest registry. You need to leave, lady. This is a private club, members only. You're trespassing." "He was here," Sarah shouted, her voice cracking, echoing off the concrete walls. Tears pricked her eyes, hot, frustrated tears that she hated showing. "He's 6 feet tall, he has a scar on his left eyebrow, and he sells insurance. He wouldn't just vanish, please. If he's in trouble, if he owes money, I can pay. I have savings. I just need to know if he's alive." The room grew darker, the tension tightening like a wire around a throat. A man sitting in a booth near the wall stood up. He was massive, wearing a cut that looked strained across his shoulders, his arms the size of tree trunks. "She's not listening, Dutch," he growled to the bartender. "Maybe she needs an escort out. I'll help her find the exit." Sarah backed away until her back hit the edge of a high table. She was surrounded by walls of indifference and menace. She felt small, foolish, and utterly alone. They were going to throw her out, physically if need be, and she would never know. The trail would end here in a cloud of smoke and a lie. "He was a good man," she screamed at the backs of the men who were ignoring her. "He had a family. He matters." "You can't just pretend he didn't exist." "Enough." The word wasn't shouted, but it cut through the noise and the fear instantly. It carried the weight of absolute authority. It came from the darkest corner of the room, a booth that had seemed empty in the shadows. A figure rose. He wasn't the biggest man in the room, but the way the others shifted their stance, lowering their eyes, told Sarah he was the one who mattered. He walked into the dim light, the heavy thud of his boots echoing. He had long grey hair tied back, a goatee, and eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world and found it boring. The patch on his chest said, "President." The president stopped 3 feet from Sarah, invading her personal space without touching her. The smell radiating off him was intense, a complex layer of old tobacco, engine oil, raw leather, and something metallic, like gun oil or old coins. He didn't look at her with the same hostility as the others. His gaze was analytical, cold, weighing her soul against his patience. He looked at her trembling hands, her tear-streaked face, and then down at the photo, lying neglected on the bar. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of a predator that has no natural enemies. "Let me see that," he said. His voice was gravel, rough and deep, the sound of tires on a dirt road. Sarah handed him the photo, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Her hand brushed his calloused fingers, and she felt the cold hardness of a silver ring shaped like a skull on his finger. The president held the picture of Mark, smiling, clean-shaven Mark, up to the dim light. He stared at it for a long, agonizing minute. The bar was absolutely silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade into the background. The president looked at the photo, then looked at Sarah, then back at the photo. A complex emotion flitted across his face. Regret, sadness, recognition. It was gone too quickly to be sure, replaced by the stone mask of leadership. "You say he sold insurance?" the president asked, not looking up, his thumb tracing the edge of the photo. "Yes," Sarah whispered, her voice barely a breath. "State Farm. He was a regional manager. He traveled a lot for work. Arizona, Nevada, sometimes up to Oregon." The president let out a long sigh through his nose, a sound of heavy weariness. He handed the photo to the bartender. "Dutch. Dutch. Give it back to her." Then he looked Sarah in the eye, his gaze piercing. "You're a persistent woman, Sarah. Mark always said you were stubborn. He said you wouldn't let a bone go once you bit down on it." Sarah froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air left her lungs. "You know my name," she breathed, shock replacing fear. "You know him, you admitted it." "I knew him," the president corrected, using the past tense with a finality that chilled her blood. He turned his back to her and walked behind the bar. He crouched down, rummaging through a cabinet that was clearly locked, hidden beneath the bottles of whiskey and vodka. The sound of keys jingling, a heavy click and the slide of a drawer. Then he stood up, holding a black plastic bundle. It was dusty, as if it had been sitting there for years, waiting for this exact moment, waiting for her. He placed the bundle on the bar top. With slow, reverent movements, he peeled back the black plastic. "He didn't come here for a drink, Sarah," the president said, his voice softer now, almost gentle, stripping away the aggression of the room. "And he didn't just visit. He wasn't a customer." He unfolded the object. It was a leather vest. A cut. But it wasn't new. It was beaten, weathered, the leather cracked in places, stained with road grime, rain, and grease. It had a smell that filled the space between them, the smell of the open road. On the back, the rockers read, "Hell's Angels and California." But it was the front that stopped Sarah's heart in her chest. Over the left breast pocket, there was a patch that said Rook, and pinned directly into the tough leather was a Polaroid picture. It was Mark, but it wasn't her Mark. The man in the Polaroid had a thick, unkempt beard. His hair was long and windblown, and he was straddling a custom Harley-Davidson, holding a bottle of Jack Daniels, laughing with a ferocity she had never seen. He looked dangerous. He looked free. He looked like a stranger wearing her husband's face. "He lived two lives," the president said, his eyes locking onto hers, forcing her to accept the visual evidence. "To you, he was Mark, the insurance guy who worried about deductibles. To us, he was Rook, and he was one of the best prospects and then full-patch members we ever had. He didn't travel for sales conferences, Sarah. He traveled for the club. He was running runs to Arizona, Nevada, Oregon. The insurance job was real, sure, he was good at numbers, but it was secondary, a cover, a way to keep you safe, to keep this world," he gestured around the dark, smoky room, "away from yours." Sarah gripped the edge of the bar to keep from collapsing. The betrayal was so massive it felt like a physical weight crushing her lungs. Her knees buckled, and she leaned heavily against the wood. "He lied," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Everything was a lie. Our marriage, his job, who he was." "Not everything," the president said sharply, defending the dead man's honor. He reached for an unlabeled bottle of amber liquid and poured a generous glass. He slid it across the wood toward her. "Drink. You're in shock. You're pale as a sheet." Sarah pushed the glass away, anger suddenly overriding the grief and shock. The alcohol splashed onto the bar. "Don't tell me what to do. My husband was a gang member, and you all knew. You all sat here and laughed about it." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the men who had intimidated her earlier. Now she only felt fury. "You let me grieve for 3 years. You let me file police reports. You let me cry myself to sleep wondering if he was hurt while he was playing dress-up with you. Where is he?" She screamed the last words, her voice raw. "Where is he? If he's so loyal to this club, why hasn't he come home? Did he just decide he liked this life better than me? Did he choose the bike over his wife?" The president leaned in, his face becoming hard as granite, his eyes narrowing. "Don't insult him. Not in this house. He didn't leave you. He didn't choose the bike over you. He died for us. And in a very real way, he died for you." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Died. Sarah felt the fight drain out of her legs. The anger evaporated, leaving a cold void. She slumped onto a bar stool, covering her face with her hands. "Tell me," she sobbed into her palms. "Tell me the truth. No more lies. I deserve the truth." The president nodded to Dutch, who moved quietly to the front door and locked it. The click of the deadbolt was final, sealing them in. 3 years ago, the president began, his voice low and steady, a storyteller recounting a tragedy. "We were in a war, not a metaphor, a real war with a rival club from down south, the Mongols. It was over territory, roots, respect. It got bloody. People were getting hurt. Rook, Mark, he was moving something important for the club. Not drugs, nothing like that. Just club assets, cash reserves, essential documents." He took a sip of his own drink, wincing slightly as it went down. He was on Route 66, near the Needles. It was 3 a.m. He realized he was being tailed. 2 cars, 4 bikes, rivals. He was outnumbered and outgunned. He knew if they caught him, they'd torture him to find out where the rest of us were. And he knew something else. He knew if he led them back to his house, back to you, you would be collateral damage. They wouldn't hesitate, Sarah. Sarah stared at him, horrified. The suburban safety she had lived in was a thin veil over a violent reality she never suspected. She saw images of Mark driving in the dark, headlights in his rearview mirror, making a choice. "So he didn't go home," the president continued, "and he didn't come here to bring the heat to the clubhouse. He led them away. He turned off the highway and went into the canyons. He was doing 110 on a bike that wasn't built for those curves. He was trying to lose them in the dark, drawing them away from the city, away from you." The president paused, looking down at the vest on the counter, his finger tracing the rook patch. He hit a patch of loose gravel and oil on a hairpin turn. He went over the guardrail. Down 300 feet into the ravine. "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, visualizing the crash, the fire, the lonely death in the dark canyon. He was alone. "We got to him before the cops did," the president said, and this was the hardest part for Sarah to hear. "We have scanners. We knew where he was. We went down there and we recovered him. We scrubbed the scene. We took his cut, his wallet, anything that linked him to the club. And we took his body." "Why?" Sarah screamed, standing up again, her hands balled into fists. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have buried him. I could have said goodbye. You stole his body from me." "Because if we reported it," the president said, his voice rising to match hers, intense and urgent, "the police would have investigated. They would have asked why a regional manager for State Farm was running from gang members at 3 a.m. The rivals would have found out who he was. They would have found you. They go after families, Sarah. It's ugly, but it's true. We made a decision. We erased him to protect you. We let you believe he abandoned you because the alternative was you having a target on your back for the rest of your life. He died protecting the club, but he lived his double life to protect you." The anger in the room dissipated, leaving only a profound, hollow sadness that seemed to seep into the wood of the bar. Sarah looked at the man in front of her, a criminal, an outlaw, a man she would have crossed the street to avoid, and realized he had made a moral choice that no normal person would understand. He had inflicted 3 years of torture on her, 3 years of wondering to save her life. It was a twisted, violent kind of mercy. "Where is he now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible, the fight gone. "You said you took him. You said you didn't leave him." "We don't leave our brothers in a county morgue to be poked and prodded as a John Doe," the president said solemnly. "He's family. He's here." He gestured for her to follow. Sarah picked up the leather vest. It was heavy, heavier than it looked, weighted with history and sweat, and clutched it to her chest. She followed the president through the back of the bar, down a narrow hallway lined with framed photos of men on motorcycles, past a kitchen that smelled of grease, and out a heavy steel back door. They stepped into a small enclosed courtyard. High cinder block walls topped with razor wire blocked out the world. The ground was packed dirt and gravel, meticulous and clean. In the corner, under the shade of a twisted mesquite tree that struggled to survive in the heat, was a small area cordoned off with a thick iron chain. There were no crosses, just large, smooth river stones standing upright in the earth. The president pointed to a stone near the wall. It was simple, unpolished granite native to this desert. Chiseled into the rock face was a single word, Rook, and below it, the dates of his birth and death. Sarah walked over to the stone. The desert sun was beginning to set, casting long blood-red shadows across the yard, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and orange. She knelt in the dirt, disregarding her floral dress. She placed her hand on the warm stone. It felt solid, real. This wasn't a file in a police station. This wasn't a question mark. This was him. He loved you, the president said, standing a respectable distance away, giving her space but standing guard. He talked about you all the time, said you were the only good thing he ever did. He wanted to get out, you know. He was planning on retiring his patch after that last run. He wanted to be just Mark again. He wanted to take you to Italy. Tears flowed freely now, but they weren't the frantic tears of confusion. They were the tears of grief, pure and cleansing. He hadn't left her. He hadn't run away to a new life with a younger woman. He had died trying to get back to her. The duality of his life collapsed into this one moment. He was both Mark and Rook. He was the hero and the villain. After a long time, Sarah stood up. She dusted off her knees. She looked at the president. "Can I keep this?" she asked, holding up the vest. "It belongs to you," he nodded. "It always did. It's his skin." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. It was black, with a single phone number embossed in silver. No name, no logo. If you ever need anything, rent, a flat tire, someone giving you trouble, you call this number. You don't call the cops, you call us, your family, Sarah. Whether you want to be or not. You're under the protection of the Hells Angels Burdu Charter. Anyone touches you, they answer to us. Sarah took the card. She looked at the stone one last time, whispering a goodbye that finally had a destination. Goodbye, Mark. Goodbye, Rook. Then she turned and walked back through the bar. The men were still there, but the atmosphere had shifted. They didn't stare with hostility. As she passed, they gave her small nods, nods of respect. She wasn't a tourist anymore. She wasn't a citizen. She was the widow of a brother. She stepped out into the cooling evening air. The Honda looked the same, but she felt like a different person. She placed the leather vest on the passenger seat, strapping the seatbelt around it as if it were a passenger. She started the engine and drove out of the gravel lot, the vibration of the road feeling different now. She had entered looking for a salesman, and she left with the legacy of an outlaw. She drove toward the sunset, the weight of the secret heavy in the car, but for the first time in 3 years she wasn't lost.